Hello, my name's Aviva, and today I wanted to share with you all the books that I read in the month of April. So I actually read 22 books. I'm very proud of myself for that number, and I did do a mid-month wrap-up. So I will have that video linked down below in case you missed it and you wanted to see all of the books that I read in the first half of the month. But I basically ended that video telling you that I was halfway through Mr. Masters by T.L. Swan. So I'm literally picking up where we left off, and I'm now going to share with you what I thought about this book. So this is a billionaire nanny romance. This girl is like from Australia or something, and she's taking a year off, and she is going to be this family's nanny. And then she's going to end up, being really attracted to the guy, and they're going to end up having a lot of really crazy sex. And then they're obviously going to end up falling for each other. So there wasn't much to this book other than that. And unfortunately, I didn't end up really enjoying this book. I think I gave it like around 3 stars at the time, like maybe a 2.75 or something like that. I think one of the major things about this book is that I didn't like this guy. Like, he was not a great dad in my opinion. Like, I don't like how he reacted to things. I don't like how he went about like basically everything in this book. And I really didn't like him for like 90% of this book. And therefore, like, I just didn't enjoy the story so much. I also don't think that there was much to the story other than the fact that like, she was his nanny. She got really close to his kids. He was a grump. She was a sunshine. They ended up fucking a lot. Then they ended up fucking a lot more. And then they ended up falling for each other. But he's damaged and, he didn't really want a relationship. And then they fight. Then they make up. They fuck again. And then happily ever after. Like, there wasn't much to this book other than like, the fact that he has a crazy sexual appetite and like she is able to fulfill that for him. And I don't know. I just didn't vibe with it. I like when there is like more to the story. I like when there's like emotional connection with the characters, and I feel like this was very much based off of attraction and stuff like that, and I just didn't really love it. I mean, like, there were a couple of like really solid points in this book, and that's why I didn't end up DNFing it. Like, I really liked the kids. I really liked the idea of the grumpy sunshine. Like, it worked well. I just didn't really like the guy. Like, he was just too off for me. But like, there were a lot of like jealousy moments, and there were like the sex scenes were really good in this book. Like, it was really kinky, really funky, and it was solid, but it wasn't my favorite. And unfortunately, I didn't really love it. And I wouldn't per se recommend it unless you really like those type of books where it's like very heavy on the sex and not as heavy on the plot. I'm also pretty sure I ended off my mid-month wrap-up letting you guys know that I think I was like halfway through Heir of Fire at the time with like my Throne of Glass reread. So I want to let you know that I also did end up finishing Heir of Fire, and then I read Assassin's Blade, Queen of Shadows, and Tower of Dawn in the month of April. So I only have 2 books left in the Throne of Glass story. And then when I'm done, I'm going to be posting a vlog for you guys. So make sure you're subscribed so you get notified when that gets posted. But anyway, that is where I got with my Throne of Glass reread. And then I also read Insatiable by Melanie Harlow, which is a friends to lovers small town romance. So these 2 people, they were friends for a very long time, and like the girl ended up like moving away when she got older, and now she's home for the week for like her sister's wedding or something, and she ends up like meeting up with her good friend because like she hasn't seen him in a couple of years, and now they're very attracted to each other, so they end up doing like the whole friends with benefits things, and it obviously ends up churning into more. So this book was like pretty classic, like very basic, very like exactly what you would expect from it. And I'm not necessarily saying that in a bad way, but the thing is, I'm not a huge fan of friends to lovers, and I always tend to like give them a shot because like you never know, but they never end up like very much like wowing me. Like, I feel like this book, it was like I thoroughly enjoyed it, like it was a great time, but like it was nothing special, and honestly it was kind of forgettable. Like, I read this, I don't know, maybe like a week, 2 weeks ago, and I already can't really remember a lot of the details unless I like sit and really think about it. So I know that I did give this book like 4 stars in the moment because like I remember there really not being anything wrong with it, but I just really wasn't wowed by it or anything like that. And therefore, like, it was one of those books that I just read this month, and it was a fine time. I probably would definitely recommend it if you are into friends to lovers, but like, again, I don't think it was anything special, at least personally for me, because like I'm not a huge friends to lovers fan, After that, I ended up reading Darling Venom by Parker S. Huntington. So this is a very heavy book, and I definitely recommend looking up some trigger warnings for it before you pick it up, because there are a lot of heavy topics in this book, mostly like depression and suicide. You're basically following this girl who she was about to commit suicide, and she goes to this roof, and she ends up seeing this other guy that was getting ready to jump as well. And they decide to make a pact that instead of like, jumping, that they will meet every single year on that same roof, and they'll just catch up and see how each other are doing and kind of be there for each other. So they end up doing this for a couple of years. And then one year, the girl ends up being late and then the guy ends up jumping. And now it's a couple of years later, and this girl basically ends up running into this guy's older brother, and they're going to end up having a relationship. So it's a very interesting story. And while it is a romance, I think that it was more heavy on the idea of like these two characters getting over their past and getting over the trauma that like somebody that they know committed suicide kind of did to them. And I feel like this book very much circled the idea of like, what if only we did something differently? Like both of these characters kept going over that idea of like, if only something was different, like maybe he would still be here today. And I think that it was done really well. Like the story I feel like was very realistic, but at the same time, I think I was expecting a little bit more from it. Like I don't think that the plot was like extremely heavy, other than it was like surrounded by the idea of like, if only like we did something differently, and like the characters kind of getting over that fact and trying to move on. And I think it was an amazing story. Like I really did enjoy it. Like even though like I think that like the romance kind of came like second, I'm not complaining about that idea. I think what I'm complaining about is that I was expecting a little bit more from it and I didn't end up getting that. Like I think that this book, like I think that like I was expecting maybe a little bit more from the plot, but also I was expecting this book to like rip out my heart, and it didn't end up doing that. Like it was just unheart-wrenching enough that like I didn't end up crying. And I guess I'm complaining, but at the same time, like I'm kind of not sad about that, because I really hate when books like rip out my heart that way. I ended up giving this book like a 4.5 stars. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was a little bit different than like what I expected from it, but like at the same time, it was a solid read. After that, I ended up picking up 5 Rounds by Nikki Castle, which is about this girl who is about to get evicted from her apartment. So she ends up moving into her best friend's bedroom while he's out on business, and she's like waiting for her next apartment to be available. And the only issue with this is that she now has to share the apartment with this guy's roommate, who she happens to absolutely hate. He's like a player. She just does not get along with him. They're always bickering, things along those lines. So it's basically a forced proximity, haters to lovers sort of romance. And unfortunately, I didn't absolutely love this. Like it did take me a while to actually get into the book. Like I feel like it was a very slow start. I kind of liked the middle of it, once they like started having like all this like hate sex and then like slowly falling for each other, like I was kind of here for it. Then the book unfortunately ended up ending off with like a miscommunication trope, and I am just not a fan of that. So I didn't really like the majority of this read, even though there were a handful of stuff that I did like about it. Like this guy, he was very much a player, which I wasn't necessarily a fan of, but I did enjoy seeing him slowly start to get like really jealous of this girl and slowly start to realize that like maybe he could be a relationship guy. Like maybe like, you know, even though he just wants to have sex with this girl, like maybe he actually enjoys hanging out with her after the sex is over, and maybe like, you know, they kind of get along and stuff along those lines. Like it was kind of fun to see him slowly realize that like he actually likes her. And I think that this was like a guys falls first at the end. I don't really remember, but either way, like there were some solid elements to this book, but unfortunately, like it just didn't pull through for me, because like for the majority of it, like I just was kind of bored. Like I know that I skimmed a lot of it and like I just wasn't so into it, and then ending off with a miscommunication like really brought it home for me that I didn't really love this book. So I think I ended up giving it maybe like a 3 stars or so, because like there were a lot of solid elements, but at the end of the day, like there wasn't a lot that like I very much loved about it. Like I feel like I had more to hate on than I did to love on. So yeah. After that, I ended up picking up First Semester by QB Tyler, which is a very short, spicy novella. This book is only like 177 pages long, and happens to be when I originally wanted this book, I didn't realize that it was a novella. Like I thought that it was a full-on story, and when it arrived at my house and I saw that it was so tiny, I was like, whoa, what can possibly happen in such a short amount of time? So I ended up like completely lowering my expectations and deciding to go into this book with like literally like just thinking like, okay, let's just enjoy the ride. Like I don't know what can possibly happen in such a short amount of time, so I'm just gonna go with the flow. And then I ended up actually very much enjoying it. Like it was much better than I expected it to be, because I basically had no expectations, because like I really couldn't figure out what can happen in such a short amount of time, you know? So either way, I really did love it. Like it ended up being a teacher-student forbidden romance with an age gap, and I really liked it. I mean, obviously it was very, very steamy, but I thought that like there was a solid enough plot going on the entire time. Like I was worried that it was just going to be like a quick short porno basically. And while it definitely was that, I feel like there was a little bit more to it. And I kind of like that. Like this guy, he was very possessive, very jealous. And I feel like that did help me like get through the story because I really liked that aspect of the relationship. Like the fact that like he just really wanted her, but like it's forbidden and we can't do this, but like they're going to do it anyway. Like I thought it was a fun time. It was a quick, short, easy read. I would definitely recommend it if you are into like, spicy novellas. And I mean, yeah, not much to say about it. I liked it, and that's about it. After that, I ended up picking up Crow by A. Zavarelli, which is a mafia romance about this girl who had a best friend that went missing a year ago or so, and she thinks that the mafia is to blame because her best friend was working at one of the clubs that like the Irish mafia owns or something like that, and she thinks that like somebody who was like attending the club like had something to do with her friend's disappearance. So she goes to the police about this, and unfortunately they don't do anything about it. So she kind of decides like take it on her own hands and like kind of go undercover and figure it out for herself. So that's basically what she does. She ends up going to get a job at the club that her friend was working at, and she decides to like become a stripper for them. And then like, she's going to end up like having a relationship with the head of the Irish mafia, who is the owner of the club. And I just wasn't like a huge fan of this. Like she was trying to find her friend, trying to like get close to all these mafia guys. And I think that she was like way in over her head. Like I really did not like this girl. Like I think she made like bad moves left and right. And like she really did bug me. And then on top of that, like the romance I think was very like attraction based. Like I feel like the fact that like she had to be a stripper for this club, like why couldn't she have been a bartender? I feel like the only reason that like she was so adamant on being a stripper was to drive the sexual tension between this couple, because that's kind of like what pulled them together like sexually. Like she danced for him and then like he couldn't hold back, like I think that there was a lot of stuff that like was put into this story just to drive the story. And I think that like it could have gone in like a lot of different directions. And then on top of that, like relationship wise, like I think that it was very attraction based. And the thing is that there were so many sprinkles for like this story to go like very like emotionally deep. Like these characters like had little things that like, they would kind of like mention about their past and like why they were the way they were. And I was waiting for them to like, get onto that deeper level and really like bring home that like deeper connection for the relationship. And it never ended up going there. So I ended up being like very disappointed because like it was just very attraction based. And like I like when there is an emotional connection between characters. So unfortunately, I didn't absolutely love the relationship, even though there were like a couple of solid aspects to it. Like it was definitely like a touch her or you die sort of relationship. Like he was very possessive, very jealous, and he literally did kill anybody that put a hand on his like person, like on his girl. So I liked that aspect of it, but unfortunately, like I didn't like the majority of the actual story and the actual plot line. So I think I ended up giving this book like a 3 stars or so. Like I definitely think that it was a very easy read. Like it was a book that I was very easily able to fly through, but I do know that like at the 50% mark, like I just realized that like I wasn't so into it. So I did end up skimming it a bit, but like whatever, it was a fine time. It was a solid mafia romance. Like it did have a lot of like classic mafia stuff going on, like the wars and the vibes and like, everything about it. Like it was very mafia-y. And if you are a fan of mafia romances, I think you should definitely check it out if you are a huge fan of like Touch Her or You Die. But at the end of the day, like, I don't know, I'm kind of a little picky and this one just didn't do it for me. Next, I read Faked by Carla Sorensen, which is the second book in the Ward Sisters companion series. So in this book, you're basically following this girl who has had a crush on her twin's best friend for a very long time. And one day she basically gets this opportunity to accompany him to an event, except she has to pretend to be her twin. But she says yes anyway, just because she wants to spend some time with him, even if she has to pretend to be somebody else. So the day of the event, she basically gets dressed, goes downstairs, and instead of her crush showing up to be her date, her crush's older brother ends up showing up, and she's going to end up having to pretend to be her twin and spend the night with this guy instead. So the story kind of goes from there, and it ends up taking a lot of twists and turns that I did not expect to happen. And I absolutely loved this book. Like I want to tell you everything that happened in this book, but I don't want to spoil it for you. So all I'm going to say is that it was an easy 5 stars. Like I flew through this book. I really loved it from beginning to end. And there was so much about it that I really loved. Like I really liked the relationship that ended up happening in this story. And I think that it was it was such a good story. Like, even though it was very like, attraction based, like they very much liked, what they saw in each other, they also had this really like good emotional connection. Like, they talked a lot, they really got to know each other a lot, and I really liked that aspect of it. And I think like what was like, the tip of the iceberg for me to really make me enjoy this book was the fact that this guy was a pro snowboarder. So I just really liked the setting of this book because of like, the fact that he was a pro snowboarder, and therefore it was set in like, the mountains, and he was like, in Whistler, where like I've been before because like I went there for my honeymoon, and like, there was like a snowstorm, and there was a lot going on in this book that I just was really, really a big fan of. So I really did enjoy this book. I say go into it blind. Don't even look up what it's about. Just like take my word for it, give it a shot, and I think that you will be pleasantly surprised by it. Next, I read 1% of You by Michelle Gross, which is a single mom, age gap, guy falls first romance. So in this book, you're basically following this guy who one day he's in the grocery store and he's picking up a bunch of random stuff, and he ends up basically stealing a bag of chips from this little girl because it's like the last bag in the store. He really wanted it, and he's really scary because he's got a bunch of like scary tattoos on him. He's a big burly guy, stuff like that. And he ends up like scaring the girl off into dropping the bag, and he basically takes it, and then he ends up going and like checking out, and he meets the mom of this little girl, and she ends up being like, who the hell do you think you are, stealing a bag of chips from a little girl? Like, what the hell is wrong with you? So then he ends up being like, okay, whatever. And then he ends up going home, and he realizes that he is neighbors with this girl. Like, he just moved into a house across the street from this apartment complex where this like, single mom is basically living. So he end up getting like really intrigued by them, and he kind of like feels bad. So he tries to like, warm up to them, kind of become friends with them, and they slowly let him into their lives. And then obviously they're going to end up having like, this romance. And it's definitely like a guy falls first, because like this girl is not really ready for a relationship. Not only is she a single mom, but she's also a pregnant single mom. And obviously she's coming off of like, a bad breakup, and like she's not necessarily ready for a relationship. Like, this guy comes into her life and just wants to take care of her, wants to be there for her, is basically like, a very, very sweet guy. And the story is kind of going to go from there. So the thing is that this book was very, very, very heavy on the guy falls first. Like, I thought that this guy was so freaking sweet, almost to the point where it was like too sweet. And I kind of like got over it after a little bit. Like, I was just like, okay, this guy is like, an angel, and like, like that's all that this book was really about. And I think that like I really liked the first half of it, but like in the second half, like there was just a bunch of stuff that like started to really bother me. Like, I was just, I guess, I think hoping for a little bit more in the story, like other than what I kind of got from it. And also like, I mean, whatever, there were a couple of stuff that I'm not really going to mention in this book, like in this review, because it doesn't really matter. But my point is that like I liked it in the beginning. Like, I really thought I was going to give it 5 stars in like the first half of the book, but in the second half of the book, like I stopped really caring about it a little bit, and like a lot of stuff just like went downhill for me. So I think I ended up giving this book like maybe a 3.5, maybe a 3.75 stars, because like it was solid, but like unfortunately, like, the beginning was better than the ending for me. And the last book that I read this month is Say You Swear by Megan Brandy. So I've been seeing this book around on my feed for a while now, and I was very intrigued, but I never really knew exactly what it's about because the book doesn't necessarily come with a synopsis. Like, on the back of the book, it just says like a little very vague quote. So like I didn't really know what I was getting myself into, besides for the fact that I did know one spoiler about the ending of this book. And because I knew kind of what was going to happen, but I didn't know when it was going to happen, I ended up going into this book with a lot of anxiety, and therefore like that little aspect did ruin the book a little bit for me, only because like I shouldn't have known that it was coming, but I knew it was coming, so I kept waiting for it, sort of thing, But then on top of that, like even though I didn't really know this going into the book, this book was a love triangle. And I think that it's very important to know that this book is a love triangle, because if you're not a fan of love triangles, then you're not going to enjoy this book, because this entire book was surrounded by a love triangle idea. And even though I did go into this book knowing that there was something about 2 guys, like I thought that like, there was like one guy in her past and like, there's another guy in her future. And it was kind of like that, except it was more love triangle-y than I expected it to be. And I'm just not a fan of love triangles. So that is actually one of the main reasons why this book did not work for me. But the thing is that this book was so like The Summer I Turned Pretty. Like, if you read The Summer I Turned Pretty by Jenny Han and you were a massive fan of it, then you'll literally like die for this book, because it literally like was that book. Like, take all of the ideas in this book, jumble it around a little bit, and smack it into a college setting, and this is literally the book. Like, I think that it was so freaking similar. It gave me all of the same feelings, all of the same vibes, and I think that like if you liked one, you'll definitely like the other. Except while I did enjoy The Summer I Turned Pretty at the time that I read it, I definitely would not enjoy the series now, because my tastes have definitely changed, and therefore this book 100% did not work for me. I didn't end up liking it. I ended up having so much anxiety the entire time I was reading it. I was so anxious for the thing that I knew was going to happen to finally happen. And because it only happened like way later into the book, like I thought it was going to happen like maybe halfway through, but it only ended up happening like, I don't know, maybe somewhere around there. And therefore I was waiting for it the entire time. And it put me on edge a little bit too much. And therefore I did not enjoy my time reading this book for a lot of different reasons. So I didn't like it. I think I ended up giving it like maybe a 2.5, a 2.75 at the time. And my reasoning for that is like, I could have given it like a 1, you know, like I really didn't enjoy it. But I think that like it was a very personal preference for me. I think that like if you like love triangles, if you liked The Summer I Turned Pretty, and if you like the vibes of this book and you don't mind the idea of the spoiler that happens at the end, because I know that a lot of people aren't a fan of the trope that happens, but I'm not going to say it because it's a massive spoiler, then I think that you'll enjoy this book. Like, I think that it was done well for what it was, but unfortunately it wasn't for me. And I didn't really know what it was going into it. So I couldn't really have known to stay away from it. But now I know to stay away from it. And basically I just didn't like it, but whatever, it's okay. So yeah, that is the last book that I read this month. So that is everything that I had to share with you. So let me know what some of your favorite books were from this month, or let me know like all the books that you read. I'd love to hear what you were up to in April. But either way, if you enjoyed watching this video, then please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you're not subscribed. And either way, thank you so much for watching and clicking. I really appreciate it. And until next time, enjoy reading.